It was supposed to be a routine royal appearance, elegant, polished, controlled. Instead, it became a battlefield of silent glares, awkward pauses, and one royal left completely isolated on the global stage. Cameras caught the tension. Lip readers caught the fury. The world caught the fallout. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The charity gala had all the markings of a legacy event: red carpet arrivals, global dignitaries, and every senior member of the royal family in attendance. On paper, it was a show of unity. In reality, it exposed a fracture so deep that even the palace spin machine couldn't contain the aftershocks. The moment Catherine stepped onto the scene, something shifted. She didn't need to command attention. Attention found her. It was emotional, deliberate, and thunderous. As she moved through the hall, it became increasingly clear that this was no longer just about royal duty. This was about presence, and hers was eclipsing everyone else's. Then came the photo call. A carefully staged arrangement meant to display cohesion. But Charles was left standing alone, several feet away from the others. Catherine, meanwhile, was surrounded by foreign leaders, celebrities, and even senior royals who subtly leaned into her orbit. The image was symbolic, not just in its awkwardness, but in what it implied. The monarch was physically present, but politically diminished. And Camilla? Her position was even more precarious. When the event neared its midpoint, organizers announced a celebratory toast. Traditionally, the Queen Consort would lead such a moment. But as Camilla stood and prepared to speak, she was intercepted, quietly informed that the evening's host had chosen a different speaker. That speaker was Catherine. The shock was instant, the humiliation unavoidable. Camilla sat down slowly, her expression betraying years of buried resentment. She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Meanwhile, Catherine rose to deliver what would become the most talked-about speech of the night. She spoke with confidence, grace, and a steady voice that cut through the formal air like a blade. Her words spoke of duty, evolution, and resilience, language once used by Queen Elizabeth herself. The audience erupted. Charles's earlier remarks, by contrast, now felt like a distant echo. His opening had been met with respectful nods. Catherine's close was met with a standing ovation. The protocol error that followed only deepened the divide. During the final procession, Camilla was mistakenly placed behind Catherine. It was a minor logistical mishap with major symbolic implications. In the rigid hierarchy of royalty, such placement isn't arbitrary, it's authority in motion. And for Camilla to walk behind Catherine was a signal, whether intentional or not, that the new order was already forming. She was seen muttering under her breath, her jaw clenched. Charles looked on but said nothing. Some described him as pale. Others said he seemed utterly alone. Backstage, panic took hold. Palace staff raced to rearrange upcoming appearances. Communications aides frantically drafted talking points to explain the night's sequence of events, but it was too late. The damage wasn't just public, it was deeply personal. The king had been overshadowed, the Queen Consort had been sidelined, and Catherine had done none of it through manipulation or confrontation. She had simply stood still while the world moved to meet her. But while the world watched the surface cracks behind palace walls, the tectonic plates of power were already shifting, and Catherine wasn't standing alone anymore. Long before Charles whispered those fateful words, one woman had been silently gathering the trust of a nation and the loyalty of the royals who mattered most. Catherine wasn't just stepping up. She was stepping into a role that many had already accepted: queen, unofficial yet undeniable. The public didn't need a proclamation to know where the future was heading. In the wake of uncertainty, health concerns, and fractured leadership, Catherine emerged as the calm center of the storm. Polls consistently showed her outshining both King Charles and Queen Camilla in approval ratings. But it wasn't about numbers, it was about presence. She didn't chase the spotlight. She carried the crown's weight as if it had always belonged to her. And it wasn't just the people who noticed. Inside the palace, quiet gestures revealed the shift. At private ceremonies, Princess Anne, fiercely traditional and famously reserved, was seen allowing Catherine to speak first, a rare and deliberate sign of deference. Prince Edward, the monarch's own brother, reportedly asked Catherine's opinion before advising the king on a sensitive regional issue. Even Sophie Wessex, long known for her measured distance from internal politics, appeared beside Catherine more often, offering not just support, but alignment. Behind the gilded doors of palace chambers, a phrase began circulating among senior aides, "Her Grace." It wasn't official, it wasn't instructed. Those closest to the machinery of monarchy had begun acknowledging what the world outside was already whispering. Catherine was the axis around which the institution was now spinning. Leaked notes from one of Charles's own briefings revealed he had once described her as having an exceptional sense of duty and balance. A subtle phrase, but telling. It acknowledged not just her capabilities, but her unique positioning trusted by both the people and the palace. Yet, with Catherine's quiet ascent came resistance. Camilla's camp, growing increasingly sidelined, launched a behind-the-scenes effort to reassert relevance. Press leaks subtly promoted her contributions. Strategic appearances were scheduled, but each move landed with diminishing returns. The spotlight, once elusive, now followed Catherine regardless of where she stood. Camilla's attempts to regain traction only amplified her absence from the public's favor. She wasn't losing to scandal, she was being outshined by consistency, grace, and the natural pull of destiny. And then came the ripple effects across the Commonwealth. William and Catherine, in their diplomatic roles, began gaining influence beyond UK borders. Former colonies once skeptical of the monarchy found in Catherine a figure they could engage with. Younger generations connected with her not because she demanded loyalty, but because she earned it. That subtle shift, power earned rather than inherited, was the final wound to Charles's image as a transitional monarch. In private, his reach was narrowing. In public, her crown was forming. But this battle for the crown wasn't just waged in the open. It was buried deep within royal documents, where the ghosts of the past whispered dangerous truths. Buried beneath decades of royal paperwork lies a clause few even knew existed, a forgotten decree, never revoked, that could change everything about succession and consort authority. Once uncovered, it became the trigger for a palace in meltdown. The discovery was accidental, or so they claim. A junior royal archivist, combing through the Queen Mother's estate records for a routine historical catalogue, stumbled upon a sealed envelope marked with an unfamiliar insignia. Inside was a document delicately worded but impossible to ignore, a clause written in the early 1980s, designed as a safeguard during periods of national crisis, named Catherine as Consort Designate in Crisis, a title never before heard by the public. At the time of its drafting, Catherine hadn't yet entered the royal orbit, and yet the language was strangely prescient, outlining conditions under which a future consort, if publicly favoured and deemed stabilising by the Crown's senior advisers, could assume elevated status regardless of marital hierarchy. It was a legal time bomb, long forgotten. Until now. Within days, palace legal teams were summoned. Experts confirmed the clause, though archaic, had never been formally revoked or superseded by newer declarations. By royal precedent, it could be enacted at any moment, provided key royal signatures aligned, and some of those signatures, shockingly, already had. The document had been quietly revisited in Queen Elizabeth II's final year, reportedly at her personal request, and updated with handwritten annotations. Though not disclosed publicly, insiders whispered that the late Queen had anticipated turbulence and sought to protect the monarchy's future, even if it meant bypassing traditional channels. And in doing so, she had written a silent path forward for Catherine. When King Charles was briefed, sources say he was livid, not simply at the contents of the decree, but at the fact that it had remained hidden in plain sight, buried under the weight of his own mother's caution. The fury wasn't just political, it was personal. Camilla, upon learning of the clause, immediately tasked her legal advisers to discredit its legitimacy. They argued it was ceremonial, symbolic, irrelevant in modern law, but their efforts failed. Multiple constitutional experts confirmed it could be activated, and that, under unique circumstances, it could even supersede the current Queen Consort's position. The clause didn't just support Catherine's rise, it legitimized it. It reframed her growing influence not as an emotional response by the public, but as part of a long-considered contingency. In a monarchy built on legacy, this changed everything. The narrative shifted overnight. Commentators and historians began drawing connections between Catherine's steady public role and the Queen's final actions. The idea that Catherine was meant to carry the institution forward was no longer speculation, it was rooted in written intent, and yet, no official comment came from the royal house. The silence was louder than words. It was as if they knew the moment they acknowledged it, everything else would fall. But behind the scenes, tension reached a boiling point. Camilla's team attempted to negotiate a compromise, but the momentum was already lost. The crown, it seemed, had already started moving toward a future its past had quietly prepared for. As old documents resurfaced and loyalties quietly realigned, one woman made a choice that would seal her fate and bring the king to his knees. Behind closed doors, a storm erupted. Camilla, once the woman who held Charles's heart, now demanded answers. Why was she being humiliated? Why was Catherine rising unchecked? And most dangerously, why wasn't Charles stopping it? It was late evening when whispers began to trickle from Clarence's house. Staff moved briskly, avoiding eye contact. Something had happened, something volatile. Camilla had confronted Charles in one of the most emotionally charged exchanges of their decades-long relationship. The door had been closed, but the echoes were impossible to silence. Staff outside reported raised voices, accusations hurled like daggers, and a palpable tension so thick it choked the air. Camilla, according to one insider, accused Charles of cowardice, of sitting idle while she was slowly erased from the monarchy's future. Her words were sharp, her tone unrecognizable. She demanded to know when he had chosen Catherine over her, not just in strategy, but in loyalty. Charles, cornered and emotionally exhausted, didn't deny it. Instead, he offered a response that shook the core of their already strained alliance. He told her Catherine's presence had become necessary for stability, that the public had already crowned her in their hearts, that the monarchy couldn't survive another fracture. His words weren't cruel, they were honest, and that made them all the more devastating. Camilla had spent years climbing to the position of Queen Consort, enduring scrutiny, scandal, and resentment. Now, it was being unraveled not by scandal, but by a woman who never asked for a crown and yet wore it without needing to try. Camilla left the room in silence, her eyes red, her steps unsteady. Those who saw her described her as shattered. She cancelled appearances, issued statements about needing rest. The phrase health strain was used repeatedly, but no one believed it. What she was truly suffering from was betrayal, emotional, institutional, and irreversible. Charles, meanwhile, was said to be inconsolable for days, retreating from key meetings and avoiding public engagements. The palace spun it as routine restructuring, but those closest knew better. Something foundational had cracked. It was then that Princess Anne entered the picture, not as a spectator, but as a force. Charles reportedly summoned her, seeking counsel from the one royal who had never wavered in her service. Anne listened, offered few words, then delivered a line that cut through the fog like a blade. You need to act decisively. She didn't name names. She didn't need to. Her message was clear. Charles couldn't continue straddling two worlds. The time for hesitation had passed. Camilla's withdrawal from the spotlight marked a turning point. Her team, once assertive, grew quiet. Her calendar emptied. She appeared only when necessary, often looking distant, as if already halfway gone. And in her absence, something unspoken began to take shape. The monarchy wasn't mourning the shift, it was adjusting to it, accepting it. But Camilla's retreat created a vacuum, and into that space stepped the one person no one expected to act so boldly: Princess Anne. In times of chaos, The crown turns to its strongest, and when Princess Anne made her move, it was with the precision of a general and the heart of a protector. Her allegiance wasn't just political, it was deeply personal. And it shook the palace to its core. Anne had always been the monarchy's quiet shield, unwavering, unsentimental, and laser-focused on duty. But when she saw the growing fracture between Charles and the institution he was meant to hold together, she didn't flinch, she acted. In a private meeting that royal staff described as unusually emotional, Anne sat with Catherine in the gardens of Windsor. No cameras, no advisors, just two women bound by a legacy too heavy for words. What Anne reportedly told Catherine became the stuff of whispered legend. From that moment on, Anne no longer positioned herself behind the Queen Consort. She walked beside Catherine. It was at a national memorial event that the shift was made visible to the world. Anne, known for her unshakable commitment to protocol, bypassed Camilla and took her place alongside Catherine during the ceremonial march. The crowd noticed. So did the press. What should have been a moment of unified grief transformed into a thunderous declaration. Camilla, several steps behind, looked stunned. The symbolism was unmissable. The senior female authority in the royal family was no longer standing beside the king's wife. It was aligning with the king's daughter-in-law. But Anne didn't stop at gestures. Behind palace walls, she began applying pressure. Charles, still reeling from Camilla's withdrawal and the storm brewing in public perception, found himself cornered once again, this time by his sister. She demanded recognition of Catherine's expanding responsibilities, her growing diplomatic influence, and the undeniable weight she was carrying in keeping the royal structure intact. Anne reminded him, sharply, that the monarchy wasn't built on favoritism, it was built on survival. And Catherine, whether he liked it or not, was its safest path forward. Simultaneously, quiet ripples turned into waves. Royal household insiders began leaking stories of internal resistance, particularly Anne's refusal to endorse Camilla-led initiatives without review. Documents stalled, events were reassigned, support staff began being redirected slowly, but unmistakably toward William and Catherine's office. It was subtle, surgical, but effective. The firm had chosen its leaders not through press releases or photo ops, but through operational shifts that signaled a dramatic redirection of power. Anne didn't seek attention. She didn't need headlines. Her moves were about protecting the crown, not glorifying herself. But her message was clear. The old order had failed to adapt, and now it was Catherine's time to lead. The palace, once divided in whispers and allegiances, began to recalibrate under her authority. As Anne fortified Catherine's standing, a deeper crisis was boiling beneath the surface, one involving Charles's emotional unraveling, a secret recording, and a moment he would never be able to take back. In a moment of fatigue, grief, and pressure, King Charles believed he was alone. But he wasn't. A hot mic caught every word, a sorrowful confession, a royal regret, and a phrase that would become headline history. The gala had ended. The flashbulbs had dimmed. The applause for Catherine had echoed and faded. Inside a side chamber of the venue, away from the crowd and protocol, Charles sat hunched over, surrounded only by his most trusted aides. What followed was meant to be a private debriefing, an attempt to make sense of the evening's optics and emotional fallout. But someone, perhaps out of negligence, perhaps fate left an audio device running, and what it captured was not the voice of a monarch, but of a man unraveling. Charles, once the composed heir who waited longer than any other in history, sounded defeated. His voice was low, his words heavy. He spoke not in rage, but in resignation. "I can't contain the tide," he said. "It's beyond me now. Catherine, she's the future of everything this family stands for." What began as a candid reflection soon turned into a string of emotional admissions. He confessed his fear that the public had already turned the page, that the monarchy, while still under his name, had shifted its soul toward Catherine. He admitted that he could no longer shield Camilla from the backlash, nor justify her diminishing influence. The most chilling moment came when he spoke of his late mother. "She warned me this day might come," he whispered. She said the crown will find its way, with or without permission. Within hours, the recording, anonymous in source but unmistakable in voice, was in the hands of the press. It began as a rumor, a murmur through elite media circles, but by morning, it had been verified. The king had effectively handed the emotional reins of the monarchy to Catherine in a moment never meant to be heard. The leak ignited a firestorm. News outlets played it on loop, analysts dissected it frame by frame. And the public, already leaning toward Catherine, embraced the clip as proof that even Charles understood who truly carried the weight of the crown. It wasn't just a moment of weakness, it was history caught in real time. A king admitting defeat not by sword or scandal, but by inevitability. And yet, there was a strange dignity in it. A reluctant passing of the torch, spoken not on the balcony but in a quiet corner where truth has nowhere to hide. For Catherine, it wasn't a triumph she sought, but one she could no longer deny. And for the monarchy, it was the sound of transition, raw, unscripted, irreversible. But this wasn't just a leak, it was a coronation of public opinion. The world now knew what the king truly felt, and in that truth, Catherine's rise was complete. There was no gold carriage, no trumpet fanfare. But make no mistake, Catherine's quiet ascent was nothing short of a coronation, in the eyes of the people, in the hearts of the royals, and now in the broken words of the king himself, she had won. Without formal announcement or ceremony, a shift began to unfold behind the palace gates, subtle, deliberate, and entirely irreversible. Catherine was appointed to a senior constitutional advisory role, one typically reserved for the most trusted figures in the royal circle. There was no press conference, no grand unveiling, just a line in a document and a nod from Charles, silent, heavy, and telling. It was a decision he made not out of obligation, but out of necessity. With Camilla withdrawn and the monarchy in quiet disarray, it was Catherine who brought order, discipline, and calm. Her leadership didn't roar, it whispered, and that whisper moved mountains. Camilla's name, once paired with Charles in every public itinerary, began to fade from the roster. State functions, family gatherings, international visits, her absence became the norm. Official statements cited rest and recovery, but sources close to the family confirmed the truth. Camilla had chosen distance. Her presence had become more disruptive than reassuring. Meanwhile, Catherine's voice began echoing through Commonwealth circles. Leaders from Canada, Australia, and across the Caribbean issued glowing tributes not only for her poise, but for her diplomacy, her vision, her ability to make the monarchy feel relevant in a world that had started to look away. At home, the emotional temperature had changed. William, once cautious in his public statements, spoke candidly at a military remembrance service. Looking directly at the press, he said, "My wife held this family together through shadows most will never see." That sentence, brief yet blistering, was heard loud and clear. It was both a tribute and a declaration. Catherine had not only endured the storm, she had steered the monarchy through it. The most unexpected moment, however, came at a private royal commemoration. It was a closed event, attended only by the inner circle. No cameras, no speeches, just remembrance. Charles arrived last, moving slower than usual. When he saw Catherine across the hall, those in the room described something never seen before. His eyes filled with tears. He walked to her, said nothing, and simply stood at her side. It was the gesture of a monarch who knew his reign had been eclipsed not through rebellion, but through grace. Royal historians began publishing quiet essays. They didn't name a new queen, but they didn't need to. They spoke of a turning point, a quiet revolution, a shift in the monarchy's center of gravity. One essay, later reprinted globally, called it the Catherine Epoch, not as a forecast, but as a fact. The old order had not been destroyed. It had been gently retired. But while the world now embraces its future queen, one question remains: was this victory written in destiny or crafted through quiet resilience? Hidden in a locked drawer, Queen Elizabeth's personal letter to her son was only meant to be read after her passing. but when Charles finally opened it, he wept. The final words of a monarch and a mother sealed Catherine's fate in ink. The letter was discovered by a senior palace aide weeks after the Queen's funeral. Tucked within the Queen's personal writing desk in Balmoral, an envelope marked simply, "For Charles only." Its contents were not meant for the public, not for advisors, and not for historians. It was a mother's parting guidance to a son who had waited his entire life to reign, only to find the throne heavier than he ever imagined. Dated 6 months before her death, the Queen's handwriting was neat, deliberate, but softened with age. The words carried the weight of legacy and the honesty of a woman who had outlasted wars, scandals, and centuries of change. In the letter, Elizabeth addressed a subject many believed she had avoided in life, her quiet concern about Camilla. She acknowledged the public's long-standing resistance to embracing Camilla as Queen Consort, hinting that acceptance may always be conditional. But then came the turning point. The Queen shifted her focus to Catherine. In her words, Catherine was a stabilizing light in uncertain times, a woman who had understood the crown not through inheritance, but through sacrifice. Elizabeth wrote, "The nation will follow her heart, do not stand in its way." It was not a command, it was a plea. A final, loving directive to a son who she knew would be torn between tradition and truth. When Charles read the letter, he reportedly sat in silence for nearly an hour. No aides, no statements, just a son, alone with the voice of a mother who had never spoken so plainly. According to a trusted confidant, he later confessed that the letter confirmed everything I could no longer deny. It wasn't betrayal, it was clarity. And while he never released the letter publicly, its essence began to circulate through the palace walls. Those closest to Catherine were briefed. Quiet nods, changed tones, and small gestures confirmed what had been buried in doubt. The Queen had spoken, and she had chosen Catherine. It was during Catherine's first private council meeting, held behind closed doors with senior advisors and select royals, that a passage from the letter was quietly read aloud. Not in full, not formally, but just enough to let the room know this wasn't just about momentum or public opinion. This was legacy. This was destiny, acknowledged in the Queen's own words. For those present, the message was clear. Catherine's path had not been built on rebellion or manipulation, but on unwavering presence. And now, she was no longer simply stepping into power. She was fulfilling an inheritance of trust. She has finally won. Not through scandal, not through strategy, but through grace, quiet strength, and the loyalty of a crown that, at last, recognized her as its beating heart. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.